Hello and welcome to this video. On this video, I'm going to be changing out the engine mounts on my year 2000 Mercedes ML320. It's got about 155, 160,000 miles, I'm not sure. And the engine mounts are broken. So I ordered these from Mercedes. They're actually probably less expensive than ordering them online. So I got these for about $30 each from the dealer. And if you look at the part itself, it's color coded with green on the front, and it should actually be stamped front. This one's not. At least I don't see the stamping for front. Anyway, should say front. And there's a good picture on the internet showing that the shorter side, this side here, it's shorter than this, goes towards the front of the car. So the green goes towards the front. Oh, it's stamped right there. You can barely read it. So I'm going to show you in the engine compartment what we're going to be doing. I watched several YouTube videos on how to do this, and there seems to be multiple approaches. So I'm going to tell you how I'm going to try it, and we'll see if it works. So this is what the engine mount looks like. There's one on each side, one on the passenger and one on the driver's side. And of course, the thinner side faces towards the front. And over time, these just break down, and then you start hearing a popping sound when you accelerate because the engine tries to lift up. So to get started, you have to take this airbox out. You'll undo these clips and the clips that go around the sides here. Take the top of the box off, take the filter out, and then you'll have to disconnect the intake hose in the front, and you'll work the box up and out. That's not too difficult. Then you'll go underneath and you'll take, using a 16mm wrench, you'll take the two nuts off on both sides. So that's 4 nuts total, 2 on each side. This takes an 18mm wrench. To get to that, you're going to have to use some special tools. We'll cover that when we get there. You may have to take this shroud off because the fan may hit when you lift the engine up. In my case, it probably will. Ideally, you would lift the engine using engine hoist, but the special tool that's made for this particular engine to lift it, Mercedes no longer offers. So there's not an eyelet to lift the engine with. So you could put a chain around it and try to lift it. Well, I don't know if we're going to do that or not. I don't think so. We're going to try to lift it with a jack from underneath like most people have been doing. Also, you'll want to put it in neutral when you lift the engine, and you'll want to disconnect the battery. And then on the other side, on the driver's side, there's a bunch of shields in the way. Normally you take the driver's side front wheel off, and then you take the fender liner out to get to all those different parts. I'm going to try to do it with some of my special tools without doing that. We'll see how that works out. I have a lot of interesting tools that I may be able to get in there with. Don't know yet. So when we get to that part, we'll come back and talk about that specifically. The idea here is to lift up the engine, an 1.5 inches or so to get it clear of these bottom bolts. You may have to take the outriggers, they call them. Well, that's the nickname for them. The outriggers off that this bolts into, that goes into the engine or onto the side of the engine. So before I even get started with trying to lift up the engine or anything, I'll loosen those outrigger bolts, just get them popped loose so that they're not going to be loose, they're just going to be broken loose, so that if I need to, I can take them out. And then when I'm done with this whole project, I can retorque them back to their normal torque setting. So we'll get started here, and we'll keep you apprised of our progress. Okay, when I left off, I talked about taking out the airbox, and I did that, and mine had a broken part in it because somebody had taken a screwdriver and tried to pry it out. That was a bad idea. It's just held in with some rubber pieces in here, and it just goes straight down in the front. So you pop it up this way and out once you've taken everything loose. So that was pretty easy. Then I took the fan shroud loose also, and all I had to do was go underneath the truck and take off a 10mm bolt on each side. And then there's 2 clips that holds the fan shroud in place. You have to pull those back with a small screwdriver. And then on the driver's side, I didn't take the wheel off. I went into the fender well and took the fender liner out. I'll show you that here in a minute. And then I was able to get to the 3 bolts that held the shield in place. The rear shield was missing, so it looks like somebody had done this before and failed to put the shield back in. And then I went underneath and took here's the old engine mount. There's 16 millimeter nuts that go on this, and there's an 18 millimeter nut that goes on here. And then when you pull this off, there's a cover that comes off. So I'll grab that out from underneath here, and because I already set it back into place with the new one. Anyway, here's what the cover looks like, and I marked it for that it was passenger side and which side was towards the front. It goes something like this. It's a shield of some kind, probably just to make it harder to work on, like everything else on this car, truck, SUV, whatever we're going to call it. Anyway, so after I got all that done, the fan shroud loose, the shield on the other side, all the nuts off, what I did was I jacked up the engine. I put a board across the oil pan as far back as I could, and then I jacked it up. And then what I did was I didn't jack it up far enough to be able to get these out. So I took the outrigger off on this side. I used an E12, I believe it was, to get in there, and I had to use a universal because behind the alternator, they put them back there and they're really hard to get to. And I put a little board here just in case anything happened as a safety. I'd rather sacrifice the vehicle than my hand. So got all that done. So there's the old one that's out, and here's what a new one looks like. And I think it's sort of basically the same design. Now this is the passenger side, so it's still good. Didn't really expect it to be bad, but we pulled it out anyway. So now what I'm going to do is on the driver's side, I'm going to take out those outrigger bolts that hold the outrigger in place, and then I'm going to slide it out and change its mount out, and then I'll start putting stuff back together. But here in just a second, I'll show you what the fender shroud looked like, and I'll talk about that. Okay, this is the plastic piece that goes, I guess you might want to call it a fender liner. And the way it goes in there is it has a bunch of plastic nuts that go in, I think there's 6 of them. Yeah, down here, 1, 2, 3 along that way, and then 2 here. And then it comes right out. And I'm lucky I bought some extra nuts. They're the same nuts that fit on the W140. Mercedes uses these nuts for lots of different things. So I have some extras because some of the nuts were cracked. So I'll replace the bad ones and when I put it back together, and I'll show you more about that later in the video. At any rate, right now I'm going to pull out the outrigger on the driver's side and see if I can get that mount changed. Okay, we replaced the driver's side engine mount. Totally destroyed, and this was a horrible job, and I'll explain how we got through it here in just a second. Okay, over here on the driver's side, you have to take the outrigger off. Now, the problem is there's 5 bolts that go into it, and 3 of them are really, really, really difficult to get to. So even with the engine jacked up, you can hardly get to them. But there's 2 at the bottom of the main casting, and then 1 that goes through to hold the air conditioner on, and it's about a 3-inch bolt. And the problem is they didn't leave anywhere to get to them, because this is a 4-wheel drive vehicle, so it has the differential underneath it, which blocks a lot of stuff. So I'll show you the tools that we used to get these off. We did finally, we were able to do it, but it took, probably 2.5 hours to get the bolts out and then to put them back in. But it's all done and the shield's in place. And now what I'm going to do is, I had taken the belt off, by the way, and I had loosened the air conditioner compressor, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in just a second. Okay, so some of the things I had to use for this job was a 1/4-inch drive E12 swivel head socket, and that barely fit in there on the bracket on the driver's side after I loosened the air conditioner. I also have this E12 E14 wrench. I have an E10 E12 ratcheting wrench, a 16mm crow's foot wrench, all sorts of various adapters, because I used 1/4 inch to drive it with, and I had to end up adapting that to 3/8 inch drive. All sorts of extensions, as you can see here. It was a mess. So honestly, I would take it to a dealer if I had the money to pay a dealer to do it, or an independent shop to do it. But I don't have the kind of money, so but I have the tools and the time, so that's what we did. Now, also I wanted to mention, to make sure I don't forget it, is we had to take the radiator shroud loose when we jacked up the engine, and we made a special block for the engine to go underneath it so that it would give it a good support. And then the shroud, you take two 10mm bolts off on the bottom and take it loose. We took the reservoir, I'll show you that here in a second. Okay, we took the coolant reservoir loose because when you raise the engine up in the front, it's going to hit this and potentially break it. So we took that loose. Of course, the airbox is all out. The battery's disconnected. The car's in neutral. With the key in the ignition, we turned it off, but you can't take it out with it in neutral. And now I'm going to start reassembling it. I'm going to put the airbox back in. I'm going to put the shroud that goes over here back in. I've tightened up the engine mounts really well. I put some Loctite on them as well, some non-permanent. It's 222 low strength. And so I'm going to be ready to get this all done here in just a minute. Oh, I'm going to put the belt back on. So I'll get all that done, and then we'll come back with a finishing touch. Okay, basically we've finished now. We're ready to go ahead and take it out for a drive. We'd taken the reservoir off. We put that back on. I put a little bit of grease in the back of it where it slips into its bracket. The airbox is all put back together. I had greased where the pieces stick down into the rubber pieces that allow it to have sort of like isoelastic suspension. There was a couple of wire ties that went on the bottom to hold the return pipe for the auxiliary heater. The auxiliary heater motor is right here. That's so when on a cold winter day, it pumps water right off the engine jacket before it even goes through the radiator, so you can get heat quickly. So it was a great idea, but I don't think we really need it over here in Arizona, because our lowest temperature in winter is probably about 30 degrees. So anyway, got that put back together. Got the Fender Liner put back in. We'd taken that out. Some of the bolts, are the nuts, they're plastic. Some of them are cracked, so I've ordered a bunch more from my local Mercedes dealer, Mercedes-Benz of Gilbert, who, by the way, always sells us parts at a really good price. We put the belt back on. We retightened the air conditioner bolts. Everything is ready to go. We've checked it 100%. So that's really all there is. This is a really, really tough job. I think it's the toughest job I've ever done on a car or motorcycle. So I, again, would recommend you take it to a shop unless you have a lift, which would be really helpful. And then you need just a tremendous amount of tools, which I have. But even then, we just struggled. I used crow's foot wrenches and all sorts of things. But Mercedes put this together in a way that is not really conducive to being worked on. So that's all there is to this video. Thank you for watching.